Hello and welcome to another episode of the Help Me Unlock podcast. I'm so glad that you are here today, tuned into this conversation, because this is going to change the way that you show up in your business every day. When I set out to look for this guest for this episode, we started to look for a public speaking coach. We started to look for someone who was going to talk about how to build and deliver a great TED Talk, a great speech, a great pitch. But then when I found our guest today, this quickly transformed into an episode that was about much more than just those few touch points, those few moments in your business where you're speaking to a large audience, because those can be far and few. What I really wanted to do was give you something that would allow you to transform the way that you show up in your business every day. And so Ty Hoesgen, who is our guest today, is the person that we chose to bring on. Ty is a communications coach. He's a 3 times best-selling author and the founder of Advanced Growth Institute. Ty helps professionals communicate with confidence, with charisma and clarity. More on that model inside this episode. And he helps them to get more respect, to become stronger leaders, and to advance in their careers. Ty was this shy, awkward kid growing up on a farm, and he spent many years and thousands of hours researching, practicing, and experimenting in order to master the world of communication. And today he guides many leaders on their communication journeys. They speak powerfully in their businesses, in their lives, on stages, and Ty is the partner for that journey. After having spent years into practicing, researching, experimenting, mastering communication, Ty was determined not to make other people's journeys as long and painful as his own, and so he has dedicated his life to figuring out the success formula for communication, and he's bringing that formula to people's lives wherever he can. He's currently helped over 300 people to radically improve their communication skills. I can't wait for you to dive into today's episode. Jump in, enjoy. You're going to take back so much. And of course, all links to learn more about Ty's work or to connect with Ty are available in show notes or episode descriptors wherever you are listening to this. If you would like to access the free course that Ty has for us, you can find Ty on Instagram and LinkedIn. He goes by Ty Hoesgen. That's Hoesgen, Ty Hoesgen. He's also generously giving away a free course to all listeners. The course is howtospeakbetter.com. You'll find the course on howtospeakbetter.com. It is Speaking Like a Confident Leader in 7 days. Jump in, dive in, find the course, but first, get to the episode. I know you're going to want to listen to this. Hello, Ty, and welcome to the Help Me Unlock podcast. I'm so excited to have you here today.
Thank you for having me as a guest, Aditi. Pleasure to be here.
Of course. I have been diving into your content, your books, and I'm so excited because communication is central to so much that we do as solopreneurs, as business owners, as coaches, as consultants. And I've been looking for the right voice, the right guests to bring on the show to talk about this like mammoth, this superpower, if you make it so. So I'm excited to get into everything we're going to get into today.
Absolutely. Well, there's a lot to live up to with the word mammoth there, so I'll do my best.
Let's do this. Okay, so Ty, I want to ask you first. I read your story or got glimpses of your story from all the different places I could learn about you. And I heard that you are today a speaking coach, but your journey started off with you being a shy, awkward kid. How did that happen? How do you go from shy, awkward kid to someone who teaches people how to use their voices and show up and speak?
Yeah, you just wake up one day and then everything's changed. No, I'm just kidding. I wish it was that easy.
I wish.
Yeah, I grew up very much a shy, awkward, little introverted kid. I actually grew up on a farm near a very small town that only had 800 people.
Oh, wow. That's small.
that was actually 800 more people than I wanted to be around. So my favorite thing to do on the farm was to climb trees and just kind of roam through the bushes and break sticks. I loved being by myself. And I tried to avoid people. I tried to avoid talking, which worked pretty well because I had an older sister who was the exact opposite of me. So she's a very bubbly, outgoing, extroverted type of person. So when somebody would ask me a question when we were kids, my sister would jump in and say, let me tell you what Ty thinks. Ooh, I have an answer that Ty will want to share. Now that's fine when you're a kid, right? But as you get a little bit older in life, people kind of expect you to speak for yourself. And I started really realizing how important communication was when I graduated university, and the only job I could get was selling life insurance. So now imagine this, you're afraid to ask someone about how their day was, or you're afraid to ask them about their dog, just simple questions that I wanted to ask but was nervous. Now, though, my whole income is based on questions like, what's going to happen to your family if you die? What's going to happen if you get a disease? What's going to happen if you get disabled?
Not exactly easy questions.
Not easy questions. So the fact that I could only get this job as a life insurance broker asking those types of questions was, at the time, terrible, but in the long run, very helpful. And I learned through a lot of these situations, not only how bad I was at speaking, but also how important it was. There's one particular situation. I remember being in a group meeting. So we're sitting around a boardroom. There's maybe 10 people. And my boss looks at me and says, okay, Ty, what's your update for the week? You've been trying to get this big client. How's that going? So I said some version of, oh, you know, it's going and I'm working and I'm trying to get some stuff done and I'm working and trying to get some stuff done.
Right.
And he looked at me right in the eyes and he said, I have no idea what that means. And he just said it in such a way, like the whole room went silent. I was super embarrassed. It felt like 10 minutes of silence. It was probably 10 seconds. But I remember going home that night. First thing I did when I got home, I opened up my laptop. I went into Google and I searched, can I still be successful without having to talk to people? So I was trying to just avoid communication altogether, but I didn't really get that many good searches that came up. The results were not too favorable for me, unless maybe I was a tech genius and it could have meant something, which I wasn't. So then I did another Google search, and I Googled how to speak so people actually understand you. So that actually did give me some results. There's one particular article that I found. It was about speaking with structure, which is just kind of organizing your thoughts and ideas in a way that makes sense. And so I read this one article like a dozen times. I spent probably hours preparing for that next meeting just to give a quick update. The very next week, I'm in the same situation. Again, we're going around the room giving our same updates like we do. Gets to my turn. My boss asks the same question. And this time, I said, I'm pretty optimistic about this client. He's recently responded to one of my emails. And he actually said he's in a hurry, so he just wants to wrap things up quickly. So overall, I'm pretty optimistic. And this time he looked at me. Yeah, he looked at me this time and he said something completely different. He said, good job. And that was the first time I had heard good job in years from anyone.
Right.
So in that moment, I realized, oh, this is actually something I could get better at. This is not something I'm stuck with. I'm not set in my ways with these communication skills, like I just have to accept it. I actually have the power to learn things and change and get better. And then everything just kind of took off from there. I became obsessed. I learned as much as I possibly could. Over the years, everything improved. I started teaching it to others, and then here we are now.
Here we are now. Wow. You said, okay, so this turning point for you came all the way after college when you were out there in the big bad world in your job. What was it like as a kid and going through university not having this toolkit? What do you feel today like there was opportunities, there were things that you let pass by because you didn't have this toolkit back then?
Oh, 100%. Whether it was Could have gotten a better job out of school, could have made more friends, could have just enjoyed life a lot more. I took a business degree, so Bachelor of Commerce. So sometimes we'd have to do presentations for that too,
Right.
but they were always group presentations. So I would just get like the shortest part and just like read it from a paper as quickly as possible, then be done. But
Yeah.
certainly I could have had a much more successful start out of university if I had worked on that stuff. But you don't really think about it too much
Mm-hmm.
because a lot of going through life when you're like that, you're just kind of used to it.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember seeing other people who were good at speaking and just thinking, oh, I'm like, that'd be great. That must be nice. But that's just the way they are. And that's not the
Right.
way I am.
Right.
So I didn't really
Right.
think to even try to get better because I didn't think it was necessarily possible. And a lot
Right.
of university is just like writing tests, writing papers, doing that sort of stuff, which you don't have to speak to people for.
Right. Yeah. So you got by fine with those bits. And then, when you saw the charismatic great speaker, you never really looked into the formula behind it. Which brings me straight into my next question. I have met people who have never cracked open a communication book, who have never been trained to speak a certain way, and yet they do command a room. Like there is something magical about them, charismatic about them, something that even they don't know. And in those moments, I'm a big believer that you can teach yourself anything that you want to learn, right? If there's a skill out there that is learnable, you can go out there, get the tools, put yourself in the headspace and do it. So I've always thought communication is one of those things. Yeah, absolutely. You got to learn it, right? You got to learn how to put the message across, listen for how it's being delivered. We'll get into the listening bit. It's a big one from your book, Open My Ears to a lot of things, I should say. Are great communicators born that way? And I know they can be made, but are there some who are just born that way?
I think there are some that are born that way, or they just naturally develop the skills throughout their experiences. I've always wanted to be one of those people. Wouldn't it be nice if you just didn't have to put in all that work?
Right?
Like a metaphor
it
for
is
life,
work.
right?
It's so much practice, but it's like you said though, right? Like when you found that article, you read it dozens of times, not once. And that's the thing I think so many people overlook. It's not just listening to one podcast episode, even though this one's going to be filled with gold. It's not listening to just one book once or reading one book once. It is really putting yourself in that space of, I want to absorb this. I want to make this a part of me. That is where I think the shift comes for something as fundamental as communication, because the truth is we've been doing it since we were born, right? So there's some wiring that will probably need to be rewired if you want to learn to speak or listen differently. Is that the way you see it as well? Because I know you work with so many people from so many different walks of life and teach them how to do this better.
You're absolutely right. And a lot of the people that start working with me, they'll always say, oh, I've read like 10 books, or I've watched hours of YouTube videos, or the amount of Instagram reels that I've seen scrolling about this would total hours of watching or thousands of hours. But consuming information doesn't really make you a better speaker.
Right.
The biggest problem is that a lot of people, they take in all this information about communication, but they don't actually use it, or they don't try it, they don't experiment. And it is kind of challenging for a person because you don't always know where to start. You don't always know, am I good at this? Am I bad at this? What should I do? So it's one of the reasons that a lot of people find success with coaching, and they can make significant progress in like a few months after trying to do it on their own for like many years. Just because you kind of have a step-by-step plan to follow. You're not trying to do too much. Just working on one thing at a time, and it's kind of tailored to what that person needs most.
Yeah.
So certainly, if you're not a person that's born with those magical gifts of speaking, then at least having a plan to follow and not just expecting yourself to get better from watching videos. Anyone can get better if they do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's I think it's I've always I struggle to hear the words that come out of my own mouth, if that makes sense. You know, I need someone else in the room for that feedback. I need someone to say, okay, let's go back and listen to that delivery or that presentation. And when I watch myself as a third person, I'm like, ah, okay, I can see what I'm doing there. Rapid blinking, or I'm speaking too fast, or whatever it is. It's hard to catch it in the moment when you're doing it, right?
Oh, it absolutely is. And it's so interesting. Some people will go their whole lives and have no idea they're doing some of that stuff. So you mentioned whether it's rapid blinking or speaking too fast. And I've had clients that start working with me at 50 years old, and they're like, I never knew that I did this thing.
I
Like, I
did
never
that.
knew that my leg shook when I spoke in front of an audience, or I never knew that I said this many ums or uhs, or I never knew that I didn't make sense when I talk about this topic, when I've talked about this topic for so long and said that same phrase or that same thing or told that same story without
Right.
even knowing that it's actually not that good and it doesn't sound the way that I wanted it to. So, yeah, it's very interesting how you can really just be on autopilot. It's like the new self-driving cars, which we're going to see probably a lot more of. It's like you're just, you turn on the self-driving car, you talk, you're not even thinking about what you're doing or where you're going. It just kind of happens. That's how a lot of people seem to go throughout their day communicating.
Absolutely. And I want to get into lots more in that, but I have to ask you about your 3C formula first, because I know a lot that we are going to talk about today is based on it. So, tell us the big 3C formula.
For sure. So it's confidence, charisma, and clarity.
Okay.
Confidence, charisma, and clarity. So I found that if we can optimize each of these three things, that's kind of like the success formula for being a great
Okay.
communicator.
Okay. Confidence, charisma, clarity. Right. Okay. Let's go into each one of them. Break it down a little bit, Ty, so our audience can follow along and they know how to potentially start thinking about each of these areas so they can actually take back something actionable from today's conversation. So, confidence. How do you work on confidence? Isn't that also something you're born with or not?
Kind of like the speaking, you could be born with it, or you could develop it as a kid without having to intentionally work on it.
Yeah.
There's some people like that, but not everyone is that lucky. I was definitely
Right.
not that lucky. Most people aren't that lucky just to be born with unlimited confidence, exceptional speaking skills. Confidence, we can think of two different ways. One would be sounding confident, presenting ourselves with confidence, so our voice and our body language. Then there's also the internal side of things, right? What are your beliefs about yourself? What are your beliefs about the way that you communicate, the way that you show up? Because you can have actually exceptional speaking skills, but have low confidence. And I've seen that with some clients.
Interesting.
They don't need any communication tips. They just need to change the way that they feel in a lot of these situations. So, I mean, there's many layers to this, but thinking about it as, okay, am I confident because I don't know how to speak well? Like, I don't know what to say. I don't think I'm clear when I'm talking. I don't think people respond to me very well. Or do you just not feel like you are good enough to be speaking about these things? Or do you not feel like
Right.
you have the belief that you are worthy of being listened to? So it's kind of two different areas. A lot of times it's a mix of both that need to be worked on.
Right. Yeah. And that doesn't sound like a thing that you can decode in one session as well. It sounds like it can run so much deeper, because if it's that lack of worthiness or the imposter that shows up for so many of us, that takes a while to break down and shut out so that you can go and do the things that you need to be doing.
Absolutely. And it does vary person to person. Most people find that they can actually make changes in their confidence in a few weeks, which is pretty cool. And then for major changes, that usually takes us a few months. But it's always surprising how quickly a person can change to them, because they're like, oh, I've tried to do this for years, or I felt this way since I was a kid. But one of the whole reasons I became a coach was that when you actually know what you're doing which took me years and years and years to learn. When you actually know what you're doing and you have a plan to follow, you can make crazy, amazing progress
Right.
in a few months that you didn't even think was possible. Just because you didn't have a plan before, you didn't really know how to do it.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. The way I think of it is there's because I've been listening to the book, which is Effective Communication Skills. You guys need to go find it on Audible. That's what I did. Listen to it. I've been doing a couple of long runs over the last few days because I was like, I need to listen to this before I chat with Ty. So, great book, and I picked up so many little things that maybe I can't change straight away, but I find myself catching them in my conversations, in my meetings over the course of the day today. I was like, oh, hey, I did that thing. Or, oh, hey, look at that thing there. That maybe some of it is good. Some of it I'm like, okay, that's an area that I think I want to improve a little bit. But the way I see it is, it's like you're in the gym, you're lifting weights, you're building muscles, but you still have, a fair amount of fat around those muscles. So you can't see the muscles yet. But by doing the little things every day, by going and getting those sets in, those reps in, eventually, as the fat sheds off, you have this toned, strong set of muscles underneath, and you're going to start to look and feel so much better when the confidence bit, the outer layer, I'm going to say, might take a little longer to get there. But when that goes, you've been working rep by rep on these skills, right? The technical bits. And that's where I think you wake up and suddenly you're a good communicator, right? That's how I see the transformation. Or that's how I see confidence being something that you work on over time, but you can still keep doing the things on a day-to-day basis, the small bits, and start to feel and see a difference on a daily basis in your micro interactions, communications, meetings, etc. And then one day you go and do that TED Talk and it's like, oh, look at me. I did a TED Talk.
Yeah, well, first of all, I love that analogy because I'm still kind of a gym bro in a tank top at heart. So I love any gym analogy. You're right, and what's cool about that is when you're noticing these little changes and like, oh, this person responded to me a little bit better. They're usually resistant to me, or I have a difficult time with this person sometimes. But that was actually really smooth, and they responded well. I actually feel good after that interaction. All those little differences that you start to notice is wonderful for improving your confidence as well. So
yeah,
it all kind of stacks on top of each other. And the muscle building analogy is perfect because you can think of your communication skills kind of like muscles. So let's say if you wanted to get better at speaking concisely, you're like, oh, I maybe ramble a little bit too much when I'm speaking in meetings. I want to be more concise. You think of speaking concise as a muscle in and of itself.
Mm-hmm.
So if you know how to train the muscle, so you know the exercises to train the speaking concisely muscle, you do the exercises enough, the muscle gets stronger. And eventually the muscle is very strong to, unlike working out, you actually don't have to keep training it.
Right.
As long as you keep using it, it stays strong. So thinking of it as, oh, I'm not bad at this, I'm just not trained, or I just haven't done the exercises to build this stronger. It's a cool perspective because then that really shows you can get better at anything.
Absolutely. Yeah, I love that. Okay, so confidence, even though it feels like this big block, what I want you to take away if you're listening to this today, and I think Ty does too, is you can be working on it a little bit at a time, and you can be working on the smaller pieces while you build the confidence to be able to project and share powerfully and show up powerfully. Part 2 was charisma.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about charisma. To me, that is totally a you're born with it, not born with it thing. So you need to give us some tips here.
It's so interesting. A lot of people will say similar things about being born with or certain traits. Like, okay, maybe confidence I can build, but charisma, I think that one. I think that one I'm born with. I don't know if that one can be built. Well, when we break it down, what would make a person charismatic? right? If somebody walks into a room and they introduce themselves to me, what would they do for me to say that they're charismatic? Well, maybe they'd walk in with good posture and they'd smile and look me in the eyes and shake my
warm
hand.
smile. Yeah.
They'd maybe introduce themselves with a confident voice.
Yeah.
They'd perhaps ask me questions in a conversation and show interest in me. Maybe they'd tell me a story that was fascinating to
joke.
listen to.
I love
Maybe
anyone
they
that
tell me a
opens with a
joke.
little humor. Yeah.
Exactly. Maybe they show they have a good sense of humor. They're keeping the mood light and positive. So they're doing all these things which are behaviors or actions,
Right.
which would cause us to think that they're charismatic.
Right.
So, Dee, if I, let's say, replicated all those things, what do you think the chances are that somebody would call me charismatic?
Yeah, right there. Charisma. So it's almost, but it would then maybe for some people feel like a little bit of an act before it starts to feel natural.
This always comes up. It's the should I fake it till I make it type of thing. And I don't particularly like that phrase because I don't believe we are faking these things. We're more adding parts to ourselves, or we're adding tools that we can use to who we already are. Because is it fake to look someone in the eyes and shake their hand? It's like, not really. I'm just looking someone in the eyes and shaking their hand. Is it fake to tell a story if it's a story that I have learned and like to tell? Well, no. I'm just adding things to who I already am. So I like to think of it as you're becoming a elevated version of yourself instead of faking it and trying to be someone else.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think as with anything, I mean, let's go back to the gym because I like that space as well. It feels weird the first few times, you know, it's going to take a little bit of getting used to, and you're probably going to be that awkward. Oh, should I smile now? Oh, was that too big? Was that too handshake now? Maybe not. For a bit until you're like, yeah, okay, I feel like this is a natural part of how I walk into a room now.
One of the best pieces of advice I ever heard years ago was from one of my former coaches. And I was telling them about how I felt really uncomfortable doing something that they had me doing with my communication. I don't remember exactly what it was. And I was like, I don't think this is me. I don't think this is like natural. And they said, it's not that it's not natural or that it's not you. It's just unfamiliar.
Right.
So everything that's unfamiliar will feel weird until eventually it becomes familiar, and then it will feel natural. So that shift was really helpful, because if something feels maybe off, I don't know if this is me, this doesn't feel authentic, it's just because you haven't done it much and it's just unfamiliar. So once it becomes familiar, you're like, oh, no, this actually feels natural and normal and fine now that it's gone from unfamiliar to familiar.
When you share about that, it makes me think of absolutely everything that I have done along my business journey, whether it's pitching, selling, marketing, showing up on social media, talking to a collaborator, a podcast episode. Everything felt so, let's call it unfamiliar the first few times I did it. And now so many of those pieces are just natural parts of the business, and there's still a whole world of things that feel unnatural to me, right? Like going live on social media, which I really still don't enjoy. I push myself to do it, but it's not unnatural because I do a lot of live conversations. It's unfamiliar, that specific setting. It's such a great way to wrap your head around, this is just new to me. You know, I'm going to get there by doing it 5 or 7 or 10 times.
Absolutely. And when you think about that, it can be applied to actually any aspect of life to really help you overcome that. Oh, it's not that I shouldn't be doing this. I just need to get it to that point where it's familiar. So if you can stick with something until it's familiar, pretty much anything, you'll notice, oh, this is not so bad after all.
Right. Absolutely. Let's move to the third C, which is clarity. Tell me a little bit about clarity. Big one. And I know it's kind of missing for a lot of us that aren't thinking about it.
This is a big one, especially for anyone that's in business, anyone in the professional world. I don't know how many times I've heard a person speak, whether I'm having a conversation with them or maybe I'm listening to a presentation or even if I'm at a conference. And sometimes they sound like good speakers even, but I don't quite get what they're trying to tell me. Right? It's a bunch of words. I'm like, yeah, but like, what's the main idea here? Like, what do they really want me to know? What's the point?
Mm-hmm.
And so if it's not clear and very easy to understand, it doesn't matter how good you sound or what you're saying because people aren't even going to remember it.
Right.
So with clarity, I'll give some actionable tips that people can take away and start using right away. And so speaking with structure, which is actually one of the things that I first learned from my story when I learned that I could become a better communicator. Speaking with structure is ways of organizing your thoughts and ideas so that not only is it easier for others to understand you, it's also easier for you to explain yourself. So an example of a structure, one of the most popular, most commonly used easy ones, is point, reason, point. Point, reason, point. So essentially if somebody asks you a question, you're in a meeting, you want to be as short and concise as possible, you'd start with your main point, so that's the answer, that's the main idea. And you give your reasons, or maybe you only have one reason, that's fine too, to support your point. So why do you believe this? Why do you think this is true? And then you restate your point at the end, just so that it's super clear to everyone listening. Now this works well because in psychology there's a couple terms called the primacy and recency effects. So basically what that means is that we remember the things we hear first and the things we hear last the most. So if I'm in a meeting and I really want people to understand and remember my main point, for example, you're deciding between maybe two options, right? There's two options and someone says, what do you think? Which one should we do? Your point would be option A is the best option. Okay? One sentence, very clear. Option A is the best option. Your reasons could be something like it's the best option because we have more experience with options like this. We believe that we can get it done in less time.
Right.
And this option is something that aligns more with our long-term goals. So those could be the reasons. I just made that up. You might have better reasons. And then restating your point would say, that's why option A is the better option.
Right.
So having ways to organize your thoughts and ideas like that makes it so much easier for you to be concise and to be clear. And especially when you're starting and ending with that main point, and that point's just one sentence, it's so easy for people to understand you and remember your points.
Absolutely. And kind of not... So I'm often in complex conversations with clients around business models, the way things have been going for 5 years, why they're stuck, etc. And it's so easy to start with a point, go into an elaborate example or reason or whatever, for them to suddenly be like, that's exactly what I'm talking about, and take it somewhere else. And then you don't get to go back and bracket or close that point, and it just gets lost. And I discovered this when I started reading my transcripts. So ever since we moved to digital meetings, I was like, I would read the point and I'm like, I'm sure we discussed this. Let me go back and look at what I said about it. And I'd find it. And then I'd see that I opened it, but I didn't close it because it just kind of went somewhere else, you know? So to bring your own structure and awareness to, okay, I'm going to go point, reason, point, and then still give you the room to say whatever you need to say after I've done my point, reason, point, or bring back maybe like looping back to my point, that could potentially close that loop and leave the person with room to have expressed or shared their story and still taken home the point.
For sure. And I'm sure we've all been in conversations where we're thinking, how did we end up here? How did we get to this topic? A lot of times it's because we're ending with something that is not the main point. So if I ended in my previous example, let's say one of my reasons was this aligns more with our long-term goals. Now somebody hears that last and they're like, well, what about these long-term goals? And then now we're talking about long-term goals. We're not talking about the main point, which is option A or option B.
Right.
And so you'll see this all the time, especially in conflict type of situations, difficult conversations. If you ever experienced, you say a bunch of things, you're going back and forth, but then they only respond to like one little part of what you've said, a lot of times it's going to be the last thing. And so if you're not looping it back, there's a good chance that conversations are getting off track because people are just responding to what they most recently heard instead of your main idea.
That's a big one. So I learned this lesson the hard way with my LinkedIn coach, and he's been kind of looking at our DMs, looking at how, because we're now training ourselves and our sales teams not to do this from Aditi's imagination, but instead from a sales system. And we realized that my conversation pattern never really led to a close in terms of let's get on a discovery call or let's get on a discussion to see how I can help you, because I used to ask the question and then acknowledge whatever they said before. So what I left them with at the end of the message was often what they would respond to as opposed to the question. And this is exactly what you said just now. And it's just so much more clear when it's in writing. You can see those patterns, but you don't catch them in speaking.
That's so funny that you say that, because I've noticed this over the years, whether it's texting, with emails, it's very apparent in writing. If you're listening to this, you can test this out. Send like 3 lines of text and maybe have like 2 of them be questions and the last one be a statement. Very low chance that you're going to get both of those questions answered if they're at the beginning. So even if you are sending an email and you have a question that you need answered, put the question at the very end. Yeah. It's going to make a huge difference in people actually answering that question. Because even if you ask the question, but then you have a statement at the end, that's the thing they read last. They're just like, oh, okay, I can respond to that statement later. You're not as drawn to responding as quickly. So if I need a question answered, I'm not even putting like thanks or have a great day or something. I'm just ending with the question. Right. And then it's just my signature. And I actually find that gets the questions answered noticeably faster.
Okay, not even a closing, like a regards or whatever.
Not like a pleasantry. Well, because they haven't done anything yet. What am I thanking them for?
That's true. Oh my God!
I'm just kidding. The thanks is usually great, but for the questions,
absolutely. But I have a thing about email over niceties, I like to call them. So it's I don't know if you've seen the Instagram reels, hope this email is finding me well, and this person dancing in a meadow with a laptop, this email finding me well.
That's funny. I haven't seen those, but that's hilarious. Yeah, because sometimes depending on the person, I don't think they really are wishing me well here.
Absolutely. Okay. I love the model. So I like breaking things down and chunking things up because it's so much easier to learn, especially when it's something as big as communication. So confidence, charisma, clarity. We're going to go into some other bits because I have so much to go into, but once again, dive into Ty's work, pick up his book. Also, howtospeakbetter.com. That is where you want to head to, because Ty has very generously offered all the listeners of this episode a free course. It's a 7-day program to help you nail your speaking, get a little bit better, get those few initial hiccups out so that you can start practicing and getting better. We talked about this. It's not an overnight thing, but you start somewhere. And if you're looking for a starting point, this is it. Go and check out Ty's course, howtospeakbetter.com. Perfect. Okay. I have a question for you that you kind of answered when you were telling us your story, right? You asked Google, can I get away with not being a great communicator? Can business owners get away with being shoddy communicators? It's something that I have met some successful business owners that I mean, I'm sitting there wondering, how did you get to where you are this way? But but they've done it, right? And it is a question I gotta ask. Can they do it?
It's an interesting question. Can you get away with it? I would say yes, up to a certain point. You can get away with it. The question would be, do you want to get away with something, or do you want to have success with something and have peace while having success with something? And I say that
Right.
very intentionally because I know business owners like that too, but there's so much chaos in their world, and there's always like, this is going wrong, they're having a problem with this person, they're having a disagreement, they're having a fight, they're going back and forth. There's always all this uncertainty and struggle, and a lot of that is because I know that they're communicating on all sorts of not helpful, not effective, not always nice, not always clear ways
Yeah.
to whether it's the people that they're working with, like their team, or it's maybe their partners or even their clients. So yeah, you can get away with it to a point if you want to be successful, and especially if you don't want your days to be filled with chaos and miscommunication.
Yeah.
Not the strategy I would go for personally.
No. I love that you put it that way, because when I was looking for you, Ty, I was out there looking for, the conversation with my team was, we need to find a great public speaking coach, someone who's going to come on and share tips for how to speak on stage, how to present powerfully, etc. And then as I started to get familiar with your work and your content, it shifted very quickly from speaking on stage and just public speaking to communication, because it's such a big part of our daily lives. This is not something you're training for that one day in front of an audience of 10,000 or for that one big pitch or presentation to the investors. This is something that affects the way our days go from the moment you wake up in the morning to when you go to bed at night. And probably the hours in between if you're stressed and distraught. So from not doing this bit well, right? I love that you put it that way. It's not just presenting. It's not just showing up and doing one thing well. It is your entire business operations, your reality, that shifts when you choose not to work on your communication.
You're absolutely right. And a lot of people will initially start working with me because they want to get better at public speaking, like giving presentations, speaking in meetings, speaking on stages, giving speeches. But a lot of times they find that they actually are the most happy about, or are the most pleased with, the fact that their day-to-day life changes. So just, situations are more peaceful, these are more smooth, I get less resistance from people, people understand me more, I feel more confident showing up to all these different situations, because I know how to communicate well, I know how to get my ideas across, I know that people will respond to me well. Even though people don't often think about that aspect of it, probably 90% of people, that's their most favorite part of the coaching, is just changing the way that they feel showing up to all these situations on a daily basis.
Absolutely. I love that. Thank you for sharing that. It's a big one. I do want to get a little bit into storytelling before we get to our closing questions for today. We have all been sold the power of great stories, and I'm a sucker for a great story. One, do you just write a great story, or do you even have to tell a great story for it to be great? And I'll ask you my second question after that.
What exactly do you mean by, do you have to write it, or can you just tell it?
So I'd say a lot of people have great stories and they just don't know how to do them justice because they don't know how to tell them. Right? And so they can potentially sit down and work with ChatGPT today to write a great story. But how important is the delivery aspect? How important is the part where you stand up and share it with someone?
It's a very good question. For most people, if you don't deliver a story well, it's not going to connect with anyone. It's not going to sound good. People likely aren't going to resonate with it. So the majority of the time, you need to be able to deliver it well. But the hardest part is coming up with a good story and having the content, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
I specifically said most of the time the delivery is very important, because I actually heard, a couple months ago, I was at a conference, heard somebody speaking about overcoming their battle with cancer, and then in their case they almost lost their first child, and his heart stopped beating, but then ended up surviving, and they brought it back to life. And this person actually wasn't a very good speaker, and it wasn't delivered well, but the story was so good
remarkable. Mm-hmm.
that it didn't even matter. Now, for most of us, we don't have stories that are that emotional and powerful. Like, I don't have any story that's anywhere near as emotional and powerful as something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So unless you have something like that, you could get away with, not being the best speaker or delivering it that well. But from almost all of us, the stories that we're going to tell, the delivery is very important, just to make sure that people resonate with it, they connect with it. Because if I'm telling a story like this and I have a monotone voice and I don't really have any pauses and everything kind of sounds the same, no story is really going to sound that well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Now I have the super hard task of picking one or two questions, because I know we're coming to the top of our hour together. So I have some written down here that I jotted down while I was listening to your book. And one of them is around body language, because I did the little exercise that was in your book, which was kind of sit hunched down with your head down, count of 5, see how you feel, and then sit upright, chin up, and count of 5 and see how you feel. And I was like, oh, that felt different. That was weird, because I do yoga, I do a bunch of different things, but I don't do them from the perspective of how did that make me feel, specifically the physiological signals that I sent my brain in that movement, right? I'm typically doing it for the stretch, or because I have to do that stretch after my run, or whatever it is. So when I did that, though, it was probably the moment, the mindfulness of it, but just the power of what we tell our bodies with our bodies and what we tell other people with our bodies was mind-blowing for me. So body language to me, after I read that or listened to that section of your book and re-listened to it, I feel like it's a language we all speak, and yet a lot of us don't know what we're saying with it. So where do you begin to start getting mindful about your body language? Is it just awareness? I think this is one of those things you can probably listen to content and learn a little bit about it and start small. Where do you recommend people begin if you've not spent the time thinking about this before, or you haven't sat through body language lessons at your corporate culture office before?
Yeah, well, first of all, Aditi, you did such a good job there when you said the way that, how did you phrase this? You said what we are telling our bodies about us. Oh, I forget how you said it. You said it so good. What we are telling our bodies using our bodies, and what we are telling others using our bodies. That's such a good way of putting it, because our body language changes how we feel, it sends signals to our brain. It also changes how others perceive us, right? Changes the signals we're sending to others. So great place to start with body language. Fortunately, it's an easy thing to start with. It's just changing your posture and your body position. Right. So, for example, your shoulders down and back. If you're listening, you can do this now. Adjust however you're sitting or standing. So sit up or stand nice and straight. Shoulders down and back. Make sure your head's up. And take up a good amount of space. We don't want your legs closed. Just have them comfortably apart. Try not to have your crossed arms or anything in front of your body. Just have your arms at your sides or on your legs. Make sure that you're open and upright. And so in this position, you're sending signals to yourself that you're confident, that you're open. So this is one of the easiest places to start, because most of us have terrible posture or we're crossing our arms or kind of hunched over. So even just doing this is a great place to start. And another thing you can be aware of is what you're doing with your hands, because a lot of us are fidgeting with our hands, or we've got our hands in our pockets.
Right.
And there's a very close link between your hands being visible to others and how trustworthy you seem.
Yes.
So even just having your hands out in the open somewhere and keeping this great body language, that'll do wonders for how you feel and how others perceive you.
Wow, that's it. So that, I would say, for our Zoom video meeting era, that's probably a big game changer for so many of us. For those of you watching this on video, there is a before we spoke about body posture and facing the camera and rolling your shoulders back moment at the T. And then there is an after we spoke about this at the T. So watch out for that switch. It's such an easy, actionable little thing. And there's so much more with body language. I do recommend, once again, get your hands on a copy of Ty's book. There was, I'm going to say, a whole 20-minute segment on just what you're saying to yourself and to people with your body, and how you can just make tiny little shifts and create some awareness in your day of that language that we're all using, the nonverbal communication. I want to close, Ty, today on something actionable for our listeners to take away. So everyone that's listening to this podcast is growing a business. They could be growing the kind of business that we help them grow, which is a coaching, consultancy, and expertise-based business. But there's a few wanderers from different areas of life and business that are listening to this show as well. What can someone listening to today's episode take back and do? 3 actions, 3 tips that you can give them that can help them start to become better communicators right off the bat.
The very first thing I'm going to recommend to everyone is to record yourself. Record yourself in key situations that are going to have an impact on you or your business. So, for example, one of the best things I did for my coaching business was recording my sales calls and then watching them back. Because you'll probably notice when you do this, oh, you're doing something weird, or you look weird at a certain point, or you say something that doesn't really make sense, or you're talking for too long, or you notice a person is zoning out when you're saying something a particular way. So recording your sales calls is great, and just recording yourself speaking for an everyday Zoom call or a virtual meeting. You can set up your phone and prop it up so it's facing you as the video call is happening. And that'll be the biggest first step for you actually knowing either what you're doing wrong, but hopefully a little bit of what you're doing right as well.
Right.
So that's the first thing everyone should do, because chances are you're doing a lot of things, good or bad, that you have no idea about. Be the very first thing is record yourself. The second thing, I got to go back to speaking with structure. This is one of the things that has the biggest impact with my clients, is thinking of how you can organize your thoughts and your ideas when you're explaining it. So point, reason, points is a great one to start with. If you need to expand a little bit and give a little bit more support for that point, you can also make it PREP. And so the E is an example or a story. So your point, your reasons, then give an example that's relevant or a story that's relevant, and then your point. So thinking of how you can organize things like that, that's going to make a tremendous difference in how you speak. And the third thing, we'll give a quick listening tip for the third thing, because we didn't get a chance to cover listening. But one of the best ways to be a better listener is to try to paraphrase what a person has said back to them. So the phrase that I teach, and that you may have heard before, is to use "it sounds like," and then say whatever your understanding is of what a person has said. This not only forces you to be a better listener, because you really have to pay attention in order to do this, it also is amazing for understanding what a person is actually saying. Because if you say it sounds like XYZ, they're either going to correct you and say, no, it's actually this, or they're going to confirm you and they'll say, yes, that's right. Either way, you get to know exactly what they meant, and it saves you so much time and saves you so much miscommunication. So it sounds like, and then whatever you think.
I love that. It's something that we do a lot in sales conversations as well. It's because it helps your prospect feel, your potential client feel like you're listening. Again, helps with clarification. And also, very often, they need to hear themselves back to say, oh, hang on, I said that, but that's not what I meant. And so many times we've had price objections busted because they had an initial price objection, but it wasn't really a price objection. There was something else under that. And then they said, wait, no, hang on. Actually, it's not price that's my issue. It's this thing that I'm more concerned about. And so just by us repeating it back to them, rather than jumping straight into the objection busting bit or script that you've learned, help them remove that roadblock straight away, right? Or help them clarify their thinking as well. So yeah, listening is a big one. I feel like we need to have you back on the show just for an episode on active listening, because it's also been one of those sections in the book that I've gone back and listened to 2 or 3 times and loved it. So, well, I know we're on the top of our hour, Ty, so sadly, I have to wrap up this conversation here and let you go to your day. You've got a thriving business going with Advanced Growth Institute. Could you tell us a little bit, very shortly, about what it is that you do inside of Advanced Growth Institute and where people can access your services?
Absolutely. So I typically work with people who have got to a certain point in their business or their career where they have to speak now in these more important situations. So it's speaking to more important people, it's bigger prospects, bigger clients, maybe you're giving presentations or speeches. These people usually need better communication skills to keep moving up, keep growing. You eventually plateau, kind of like the business owner we talked about earlier. You eventually plateau, or it gets very difficult unless you keep advancing these skills. So I help those particular, whether they're business owners or professionals, speak with more confidence, more clarity, and more charisma, our 3 C's that we talked about. And it's a mix of one-on-one coaching and corporate training, but with those professionals and business owners. I'm very passionate about the one-on-one, because that's usually where people make the most progress by far.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I can only imagine. Thank you so much for everything that you have shared with us today. A reminder for everyone that's listening once more, you have Ty's book, Effective Communication Skills, that I highly recommend, and you have access to a free 7-day course, howtospeakbetter.com. Go in there, dive in, get started, and then reach out to me, reach out to Ty, and we'll get you on your better communication journey right away. Thank you for listening, and thank you, Ty, for being here.
Thank you for having me as a guest. This was a lot of fun.
This was fun.